Have you ever wondered how nutrition information evolves into headlines? Today's conversation pulls back the curtain. Welcome back to Rooted and Restless. I'm Marianne Smith-Edge, and my guest today is a Washington Post award-winning health writer and dear friend, Sally Squires. For over 2 decades, Sally worked at the Washington Post and most importantly created the Lean Plate Club column, which in 2001 was the first column that was not only published online but in the paper at the same time. Over the years, her following grew with over 300,000 weekly newsletter subscribers and millions of people who read her syndicated column. After her career at the Washington Post, she headed up nutrition and health communications for a Washington, D.C. public relations agency working with Fortune 500 companies, nonprofits, and trade organizations. And recently, Sally has relaunched the Lean Plate Club on her weekly post at Substack. You can find it at Lean Plate Club at Substack. So Sally, welcome. It's so fun even though I see you in person occasionally, to see you again. And I think what's interesting, your background initially is in journalism, and then you added an advanced degree in nutrition. What piqued your interest in nutrition?
Well, I think like everybody, I always like to eat. And I was actually in graduate school for nutrition when I discovered that I was at Columbia, and when I discovered that there was an Institute of Human Nutrition that actually had, you could study nutrition. And so I applied to that. I was working as a lab tech, working my way through graduate school. And then I went on to get a degree in journalism and specialized in science and health journalism also at Columbia at the J School. And it just was a really nice combination. And I enjoy it. It's great.
And we need more of you and us over the years. So, when we really think about, I knew about the Lean Plate Club before I knew you. So what a treat over the years that we connected when I was in DC and became friends. But what I'm interested, thinking that you started the Lean Plate Club now, 25 years ago, is just thinking about the topics that were like hot then versus what's now. Is obviously we know there's some similarities, but what have you seen that's kind of stayed the same at the same time what has evolved?
Yeah, so I think that people and forgive me, I have 2 dogs nearby that I am actually trying to keep quiet with various types of treats, including frozen yogurt balls and some Charlie Bears. So hopefully they will stay quiet. They did for another recent interview that I did with Joe Yonan, who is the former food editor of the Washington Post. But we'll see how this goes. So I think that, I think that there's an evolution of everything, whether it's in science or nutrition and or straight nutrition. And so back in the day, I think this has changed a lot. And part of it has changed because of some pharmacological advancements. But basically, the whole idea of the initial Lean Plate Club was to talk to people about things they could do. Because we realized, I had a meeting with my editors, we realized that we were saying a lot of things about what you shouldn't do. One week it was like, don't have too much coffee. And then the next week it was something different, or it was too much fat or not enough fat or, whatever. It went around and around. And what we thought would be really interesting was to do a column that would talk about all the things that you could do, not the don'ts. So it wasn't don't have this, it was do have that, or do this particular activity. And kind of the underlying mantra was eat less and move more, which I think has changed tremendously over the years. And it's changed because now we have these drugs, GLP-1 drugs, and we realize that it isn't just as simple as eat less and move more for many, many people.
Well, you've definitely, quote, hit the nail on the head. As a registered dietitian, too many times we've been known as the food police, and it is about what to eat not so much about what not to eat, but practical advice. We can all talk about what the science says, but putting it in practical advice is extremely important. I would say, what was some of your popular practical advice, and you show that in your Lean Plate Club column now, the practical advice, and especially for cooking for one or two individuals, because too many times people are like, I don't know what to cook, those type of things. So practical advice.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And actually, so cooking, so right now, because sadly I am now a widow, my I'm now cooking for one. And I talked to Joe Yonan because he wrote a column before he got married and had a child. He wrote a column about cooking for one. And I thought that was fascinating. And whether or not you live alone as an older person or you're fresh out of college, whatever is happening, you need to know how to cook for one. And even big families. I have a son and grandchildren in nearby in Virginia, Northern Virginia, and sometimes like three of the kids are out at activities, and so you wind up with one or two people at the table that you might not expect. So what I liked about what Joe does, and there's America's Test Kitchen has a column, or rather a cookbook about this, and so does and a well-known editor, unfortunately now deceased, named Judith Jones, who actually gave us the whole Anne Frank diaries. And she lost her husband, sadly, but she continued cooking for one, and she used to set the table with a really nice placemat and great dishes, and she really sat down and savored this meal because that's what she and her husband used to do, and she wanted to honor his memory and treat herself well. And I love that idea. I think some of the other hot topics, we're seeing a lot about supplements. We're seeing a lot about protein. We're seeing, I think we're going to continue to see a lot about fiber. You and I have talked about organic and why it probably isn't needed. But if you want to do it, go ahead. And, so I think that that's why I love this area. There's no limit to the topics and the interest because I think each one of us wants to eat smart rather than, eat less. I think eat smart and move more. And I think that that's really great advice.
Well, and I think you brought up a good topic here. We all want to know more, and even those of us obviously have background in it want to know more. But we can discern a lot of times what is grounded in science or research versus not. And even though I'll talk to a few other folks about the same thing, I think the good news is you had such a following, and you were a writer, but also grounded in science, and that sometimes gets missed along the way. So how best to, when folks are looking for nutrition information, and we'll say beyond the health model, how best to kind of look at what's how to believe what is written, because there's so much out there.
Yeah, no, there really is. And so here's the good news, and this is why I'm glad I'm doing this. So the people that I knew who were part of the National Association of Science Writers are so many of them are showing back up on Substack. So Steve Sternberg used to be at USA Today. He's on Substack now. Maggie Fox used to be at NBC and some other places. She's back on Substack now. They're not only writing about nutrition, but I think they're writing and they're very much fact based. And so when I start a column, and I did this when I was at the Post, I usually start with the scientific literature, and also then I kind of weave in what is it that people are interested in? What is it that I'm hearing my friends talk about? Sometimes I'll go to Google Topics and I'll see what are people talking about online that is interesting about a particular topic related to food or health. And then sometimes my own family will say, well, what do I do about this? Or what do I do about that? And that can be kind of a nugget. I had an editor who used to say that that you could tell what was going on in a reporter's life by seeing what they were writing about, because often they were they got interested in a topic because something either had happened to them or someone that they loved. And I think that that's actually not a bad idea. So it's what's relevant to us, and science is always evolving. And so what maybe we thought was right, I mean, I think fat is one of those those topics that for a while we were thinking that non-fat was the only way to go, and now we realize that healthy fats, not necessarily unhealthy fats, but healthy fats are really important, and particularly with an aging population and one that may be poised to get diabetes, or we're seeing that rise. But just figuring out what can you do that will be smart and also enjoyable. And that's the other thing that I think, and I think you saw that when you were at IFIC, that the International Food Information Council, that we can't forget that people buy food and eat food for the pleasure of savoring it, not just for the nutritive value. So I think that's got to be an important component of it too.
Well, and you mentioned about Judith saying setting the table. I think that's important because you're right. Food is enjoyment. It's social. It's honoring time honored family traditions as well as your cultural background, and so we want to make it enjoyable and fun, just not a prescription in that aspect.
Right, like food, well, and I know that there are good intentions with food as medicine, but I think that the undercurrent of that is it's medicine, and nobody really wants to be taking medicine. So I know we're both on the board of Nutrition Today, a journal, and I think that that's one of the places that actually offers some very practical topics that maybe not widely available to the public, but really interesting for people in the field to see. And it's again grounds the knowledge that we can both impart.
So let's switch a little bit. So I agree is that not only you talked about, we want to move from we know fiber and eating more fruits and vegetables as well as the protein are all hot topics, but we have to move from the food into the kitchen. And right. You were talking about moving the thing about your go-to and reducing portions. And of course, when I worked in DC, I was there by myself at times. And so it's always like, what's the go-to meal or the go-to gadgets? Because I know that you are one that loves kitchen gadgets and technology.
Yeah, I love gadgets of all kinds, including my husband used to say too many vacuum cleaners, but
So
what? Yes, I love gadgets. So in terms of go-to food, the food that I have recently kind of rediscovered that I just love are lentils. And lentils they are so great. And I think that's another topic that we're going to see grow, which is how global warming and climate change impact both appetite, food production, all kinds of things. So that was one of my more recent columns on Substack. But I think lentils, I love them. They're pulses, which is basically dried beans. And what's great is that you can cook them in 20 minutes. You don't necessarily have to soak them. Although I listened to America's Test Kitchen, who said they kind of are more tender if you do soak them for 30 minutes before you cook them. But regardless, at the most they're an hour to make. I make 2 big batches, and I have them in my refrigerator so that I can put them in omelets and in salads, in soups, in all different kinds of things that are really great. And, they're filled with fiber, they're filled with protein, and they're really good for the environment and you.
Well, and I too have discovered lentils over the last several years, and lentil soup. I'll make a huge batch and then freeze it. So that works really well. So what's your favorite kitchen gadget? One or two. You probably can't just
one of my
have
favorite
one.
kitchen gadgets is a little. So I've sometimes have trouble. My hands are getting a little bit probably arthritic slightly. I still use them a lot, but I don't like a can opener that I have to twist. And so and I know and I don't have the space in my kitchen for a big can opener that is electric. So I found this fabulous little device on Amazon that is it's about this big, and I actually did a video of it, I think, in one of my Substacks. But it fits in a drawer. It's battery operated, and it opens a can in 10 seconds, and it takes it off very safely, and then you don't even have any sharp edges. And I absolutely love that. I've also recently found some scoops that I use. I make my dogs food because I think they're my family now. And so, I mean, I've always cooked for them, but I now cook for them even more. And I make a combination of yogurt and peanut powder, and put them in little balls and freeze them, and then they go into a popsicle for them, and they really like that. And I also have a little gadget that foams milk, because again, I just don't have space for like a big cappuccino maker or something like that. So I can foam the milk, and I can use it and really make it into a latte or a cappuccino, and it's delicious. And again, it takes up very little room and is inexpensive and fun.
And it's those little things that actually kind of can make regular food a treat in that regard. And I'm listening to you, and I've seen you prepare food for your dogs. So you really don't cook for one. You really cook for about 3 or 4 people. That's it. Your dogs eat extremely well. I want to come back as one of your dogs.
I was on deadline for a daily story, and I was working from home, and I made food for our dog, and my son and daughter-in-law came over, and they thought that was dinner.
Well, of course, it's a well-balanced meal.
Good. And my husband used to threaten to eat it as well. So.
Yeah, the dogs. It's good to be Sally's dogs. That's for sure. And thank goodness. That's perfect. Now let's hear from Mindy Herman, registered dietitian, food and nutrition writer, and a guru on all the latest food trends.
Hi, Marianne. Let's talk food waste. Did you know that up to 40% of food that's grown and prepared in the United States isn't eaten? That includes up to almost $3,000 spent by the average family of 4 each year on food that doesn't get eaten. That could be a family vacation. So in honor of National Nutrition Month, here's some budget-friendly food and eating tips. Plan at least some of your meals before you go grocery shopping. Shopping hungry and without a shopping list is a really bad idea. Before you leave, check the fridge and pantry to see what you already have and what needs to be eaten. Plan to make the right amount of food for the size of your household, allowing extra for leftovers only if they're going to get eaten. Check the local supermarket ads and apps for sales and coupons. When you're at the market, look for fresh fruits and vegetables that are in season, and also include frozen and canned items. This will help you enjoy the power of nutrition.
Now, let's return to our conversation. I think the key here is sometimes just the small little things. For me, it's really having a good chef's knife, to yes. Cut. Oh, yeah, I agree. But I do have an electric milk steamer and frother, that my husband got me because after I came back from one trip to New Zealand, in every place you stay, if you stay in an Airbnb, you will always have milk because dairy is New Zealand. And the key is they always had some type, a lot of them did, of how to steam or froth your milk because flat whites, are just so popular. And so I was like, so it was like, I have to have one. So I can agree with you there. I just wanted, you recently has written, I think, a chapter for a colleague around front of pack, and we both have kind of worked in that nutrition labeling or looking what consumers want. What's interesting is, based on what you've seen recently, we have the nutrition fact panel because think that more people are like, so what's in my food? And they're
Right.
looking at, so how can packaging from nutrition facts to we've moved things to the front of packaging as well, but how successful do you think that is, or what are people really looking for from your
Yeah, so I
perspective?
took a deep dive into that topic, and I was surprised that actually labeling isn't all that old, considering the age of our country, that it really has been in the last maybe 100 at most 100 years that we've been looking at labels. And part of it happened in the 50s when 50s and 60s when women started going into the workforce, and you probably know the story of the first TV dinner that Swanson's did, that it was actually a mistake, or it kind of helped a mistake, and that was that someone bought too much turkey and it wasn't sold, so they had to figure out what to do with it, and they came up with this whole idea of putting it into a frozen dinner, which was completely new at the time. And you and I have both visited Hillwood, which is where Marjorie Merriweather Post, who really gave us frozen food. That was her estate. It's in Washington, and it's a place to go if you happen to come here. But I think that the front of package labeling could be very helpful. But generally, what the research shows is that people aren't always looking at labels, and they certainly aren't looking at the labels at the back very often, unless they've already almost picked up the product, turned it over, read what it is. But that's not how we shop. If you shop in a grocery store, you go down the aisle, and I think it's like 3 to 7 seconds that you scan and you decide. So, but I do think we might see more labeling, which is happening in Europe, about what foods are both good for you and for the environment. And that may be something that more people will pay attention to, and maybe will say, yeah, this is I'll choose this product versus this one because it's better for the planet and for me.
And that's that about the for better for me and better for the planet. Of course, has been discussed over the years. I'm kind of thinking that may not be the hot topic in some aspects,
It might not.
for
Not yet.
not yet.
But the journal Appetite actually just in February put out 20 papers about climate change and different factors related to eating and nutrition. And they found that actually climate change does impact appetite too. And so I think we're going to see. Well, we'll see what happens. There are so many things happening in the world right now. Who knows? But it may be way down on the list. But I do think as the weather gets a little bit nicer in the northern hemisphere and we get to spring and summer, that more people may be planting gardens or thinking about, produce outdoors, and will think, yeah, maybe I should consider things that are a little bit better for me and the planet.
Well, I agree, and some of the best ways is definitely thinking about, we know growing our own can be good, but what's interesting, sometimes it's not only what's good for the planet, it's not what we eat, but what we don't eat. And so you've written some things about food waste, as I have, and so I loved the title of one of your columns that said I think the price the priciest is food in your refrigerator, and so thinking about as we kind of wrap up, but thinking about okay, if we cook for one or two, and we talk about. Sometimes, well, we buy all this fresh, so what do we do with it? Or, what are some alternatives? But I also think about, you brought out some interesting things, it's not, as we said, it's that how do we reduce that waste, and why is that important?
Right. Oh, yeah. Well, because the estimates are that 40% of food in the US is wasted. And that means that you've bought it, it sat in your refrigerator or maybe on your counter or in your cupboard, and you forgot about it and it went bad and you've got to throw it out. And with food prices these days, 40% is huge, absolutely huge. So I think food waste is a really, really important topic. And then we know that this food winds up in landfills, and that and emits CO2 and carbon dioxide, and that's a problem. So that it contributes to the food waste. So one of the things that all the books I've read now on cooking for one suggest is that you know you have to have kind of shift your mind if you've been cooking for a family, and just think a lot smaller portions, smaller everything. Or if you do something bigger, then you've got to have a lot of room in your freezer. And Joe Yonan and I were laughing that we both need to clean out our freezer a little bit more than than is currently the case. I'm working on mine, but I think that yeah, free. So I often, like, if I have leftover bananas, I freeze them, and then I either thaw them and turn them into something to use in a smoothie, or I will put them with yogurt and maybe a little cinnamon and have kind of a nice dessert. I know you can also eat them frozen. It's just not always my favorite way to do it. But I think that using your freezer is a really good way to make sure that something that might be going bad doesn't go bad. Joe said that he actually put a list on his refrigerator of what he has in his freezer. I've tried various apps to know so that I don't forget that there is something in there that I probably needs to be cooked. But frankly, the apps were harder than than making a list, and I struggled to do the apps, so I'm not doing that anymore. But I think, we can't buy big, if you're one or two, you can't necessarily buy these big family size packages of things. And one of the recommendations is to go to a salad bar and maybe buy just a couple of things. Joe mentioned that you can't buy anything but a full head of celery, which is really silly because we only use that at Thanksgiving, I think. And so it's kind of figuring out, where do you could you go to a salad bar and just get a couple of stalks, or if you need something less, can you get that in a different way? But it may seem at the time that it's more expensive per pound or per ounce to buy something small, but if you don't throw it away, it turns out to be actually a lot less.
And I find buying like salmon fillets that are frozen, but they're individual.
Yes.
That makes it so easy because pop in the oven, with a baked potato or sweet potato, and add some veggies that can, and then if you don't eat all of it, it becomes part of a salad the next day. So
exactly. That's it. So and actually, America's Test Kitchen has said that the frozen fish is actually better and fresher to eat than the stuff that you get fresh. It's less expensive. It has a longer shelf life, and it's flash frozen right on the ship usually. So that if you get something that it just says whatever the fish is, so if it's just salmon or just haddock or whatever, and nothing else, that you've really gotten something delicious and nutritious and easy.
Yes, we don't want to. I think about frozen, in the middle of the country, i.e. Kentucky, we're not going to find, maybe except for catfish, a lot of fresh fish. So frozen is going to be much fresher, and that's the same way with food waste. Definitely frozen vegetables is idea, or even canned, because the reality, they do have the nutrient, they're fresh, and guess what? They're not going to create some type of mold in your refrigerator as well.
That's exactly right. And now you can buy a lot of canned foods that have no salt or no sugar added. So that I've found lentils that way. I found green beans that way. And you can, they're great.
So I think the key here is not to realize that food in all forms, canned, fresh, or frozen, can be done. And lately, I think sometimes fresh, frozen, and especially canned, have gotten a bad rap at times. So I think what you've said is that by having these pantry items, you can create dishes without the waste.
That's exactly right. And also, and the same thing is true of spices, spices and herbs, and having those, but having maybe a smaller number on hand and the smaller amounts of them. So, but dried spices can be, fresh are wonderful, but they're just not always available and they're not always practical.
So, for one who has written about nutrition and health for several decades, in your crystal ball, where do you think the next hot topic will be, in addition to some of the ones we've talked to? I agree, we'll continue the GLP medications and some of those, but where do you think may be some other hot topics that will be seen on the horizons?
So I think we're going to look at maybe supplements will be interesting to tell. Now, when I'm very cautious about supplements. I did write about that also for the Washington Post. I wrote about a place, and I have no financial interest in this, called Consumer Lab, which actually does independent testing. So before I ever buy a supplement or think about buying a supplement, I look online at PubMed, which is the electronic version of science and just of the scientific information, and I look through journals, and then I go to Consumer Lab. I also go to this Office of Dietary Supplements at NIH, and I see what they've written about a supplement. But I make sure that whatever I'm doing or thinking about having, that it is it has what the label says it has, and that's what Consumer Lab is so great about. They're actually testing things, and they can tell you, does it have the amount of the supplement that the label says, and are there other contaminants? Things we've seen, arsenic, I think, and cinnamon, and some other things. So, and sometimes, as we know from some big studies that have been done in the Netherlands, that sometimes supplements are not the best way to go. It's really food that is better. That I think beta carotene is one of those issues where we found that the people who took beta carotene supplements actually had more problems sometimes with lung cancer than those who didn't. These were smokers. So, again, I think we're going to see it evolve. I hope that funding isn't cut too much from NIH, that we won't see the research that we need, but I think time will tell.
Well, and I think you've mentioned it. I think if anything we take away from this, food first, because of all the other benefits. Because as you mentioned earlier, fiber is a big issue. And yes, you can take fiber supplements, but guess what? If you eat fruits and vegetables, the lentils you mentioned, guess what? You get fiber. And so, exactly right. So that's the benefit. Well, I think as we wrap up, you're from a wealth of knowledge, but knowing the key is to be able to look at where we're going and realize food first, and whether we're cooking for one or for our dogs or for our neighborhood. The key is to make sure that we look about what to eat, but also that food is enjoyment. And I love the idea of setting the table, and and we all have china and dishes to use, so pull it out. As I said, I learned a few years ago, as I'm staring at all these, decades of china from grandparents, great-grandparents. It's like, why am I saving it? Just use it. Because, exactly right. That's right. Yeah, because I've said, so I break it. It dies with dignity. Someone doesn't sell it for 50 cents at a garage sale. So
right. You got it. And I think, yes, it's we all have to inspire each other to do, more of that. So.
Well, Sally, I'm glad you have revived the Lean Plate Club. And if for those listening, you haven't moved to Substack and read the columns, you subscribe. And of course, if you are a paid subscriber, that's even better. And yes, Sally, I know that's my next venture. I need to move there. So I'm hearing you in the background that I'm going to do that. In that regard, you've always been a good reminder of what's out there and what I what's next in that regard. So thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
And give my regards to Dora and Clea because they were excellent today.
Yeah. Well, they've been well fed as we've been sitting here. Take care, Mary.
Take care.
Great to see you.
You too. Bye. Since March is National Nutrition Month, it is a good time to reflect on what Sally said about adding variety to our diet, but also reducing food waste. So remember, whether you're cooking for 1, 2, or a dozen, think about how you can make kitchen time enjoyable. Maybe you need a new gadget or two, or try a new food. But the reality is, make it to where it can be about health, but also enjoyment. So here's to your health. Thank you for listening, Rooted and Restless. It's all about digging deeper into the behind the scenes about food, agriculture, and nutrition. Because after all, every food has a story, and sometimes it's not as simple as it seems. Subscribe to Rooted and Restless wherever you listen to podcasts, or find us on YouTube.